Well, the next stop on Anthony Albanese's diplomatic tour will see him meet with King Charles today after rubbing shoulders with world leaders in London.
This comes as Prince William opens up about his...
The world saw Prince William smiling on camera, calm, composed, the perfect heir of a future king. But behind that royal grace, something had just shattered his world in a way that would remain hidden from the public eye, a quiet storm brewing behind the perfectly controlled exterior. Within hours, flight logs revealed a secret journey, an unannounced trip to Scotland that even palace staff could not explain, leaving insiders and royal watchers puzzled. What could Prince William have discovered that drove him to flee the spotlight in complete silence? Was it a personal betrayal, a sudden royal crisis, or something far deeper and darker than the public would ever be allowed to know? Stay with us, because what happened next in the misty Scottish Highlands would change everything for the future king. The sudden flight began quietly, almost too quietly to even be noticed. On a cool Wednesday evening, a private jet lifted off from a discreet airfield just outside London. There was no press notice, no official schedule, and certainly no royal photographer waiting to document the departure. The passenger on board was Prince William himself, heir to the British throne, travelling without fanfare, without entourage, without any of the usual ceremonial distractions. Within minutes, the plane disappeared into the clouds bound for Scotland. But why would a future king vanish from public view so abruptly? What could have been so urgent that even the most prepared palace aides were caught completely off guard? For a family that lives under constant watch, silence speaks volumes. Royal movements are usually calculated down to the second. Security teams are briefed, schedules circulated, and every journey logged to the smallest detail. But this trip was different. The flight plan was filed under an alias, and the departure time shifted twice in less than an hour. A clear sign that something unusual, something critical, was unfolding behind the scenes. Two insiders confirmed that something major was happening. Was it a sudden health emergency within the family? Was William responding to a private crisis the public was never meant to see? As the news leaked through unofficial aviation trackers, social media exploded, and reports of an unannounced royal flight spread like wildfire across forums and royal watch communities, igniting speculation everywhere. Some believed he was heading to Balmoral for a private family meeting. Others suspected something more personal, a moment of emotional retreat. After all, William has often turned to the Scottish Highlands for peace during times of turmoil. It is the land of childhood memories, summers with his grandmother, and quiet escapes far away from relentless cameras and public scrutiny, where the weight of duty could be briefly set aside. But this time, the tone felt heavier, darker, more urgent. Journalists quickly began connecting the dots. Earlier that same day, William had been seen leaving a meeting at Windsor Castle, visibly tense. Cameras captured him glancing at his phone repeatedly, his expression unreadable. Moments later, his convoy suddenly changed course, avoiding the usual route home, heightening speculation that something grave had occurred. By dusk, he was gone. No statement, no explanation, only whispers of a devastating discovery that had shaken the prince to his core. What could possibly drive a man known for his composure to abandon royal routine so abruptly? Speculation filled the air. Some royal correspondents hinted at internal tensions within the monarchy. Others suggested new information about family affairs had surfaced unexpectedly, catching everyone unprepared. There were even murmurs about private communications intercepted by the palace, messages that revealed far more than anyone was ready to handle. Could that be true, or was it simply another chapter in the relentless scrutiny of Britain's most watched family? As the jet touched down on Scottish soil late that night, rain poured across the runway, shrouding the scene in secrecy and mist. No cameras, no crowds, just a single figure stepping into the fog, carrying the weight of something the world had yet to understand. One question lingered in every observer's mind. What did Prince William discover that sent him fleeing to Scotland in silence, and what truth awaited him there, a heavy heart behind the smile? In the weeks leading up to the secret journey, Prince William's public appearances told a story few were willing to notice. Every handshake, Every smile, every carefully rehearsed expression painted a picture of calm, controlled royal composure. Yet, behind the warmth and charm, there was a quiet tension, a restless energy that seemed to ripple beneath the surface, subtle but impossible to ignore. Those who observed him closely noticed the subtle shifts. His laughter came less easily. His gaze often drifted, as though his mind were elsewhere, far from the crowd standing before him. At a mental health charity event in Manchester, William delivered an inspiring speech on resilience and community. Cameras captured his steady tone and practiced ease, but as he stepped off the stage and an aide handed him a folded note, his expression changed for a fraction of a second, a flicker only those trained to see beyond the surface could detect. Moments later, he was ushered into a waiting car and left the venue without the usual cheerful wave to the press. The image of a man weighed down by invisible burdens lingered in the minds of observers. Long after the applause faded, whispers started circulating within the royal circle, as those closest to him began quietly speculating about the weight he carried. The prince had quietly postponed several engagements. His team cited scheduling conflicts, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Public smiles now separated by long stretches of withdrawal. When he did appear, his voice carried a depth hinting at deeply personal concerns. It seemed he was holding himself together purely by duty, carefully masking the turmoil beneath. Within the walls of Kensington Palace, staff members spoke of unusual quietness. William spent long hours in his private study, leaving notes for aides instead of holding discussions in person. Meetings that had once been lively and full of laughter turned formal, brief, and tense. Family portraits in his office remained in place, but he would occasionally glance at them with a distant look, as if trying to draw strength from the frozen faces of loved ones. In happier times, the British press, often relentless in pursuit of royal stories, began to take notice. Tabloid headlines speculated on stress, exhaustion, and the toll of public life. Official palace sources dismissed such claims, emphasizing that the prince remained focused on his duties. Yet the calm phrasing only deepened the mystery surrounding him. Behind closed doors, something had unsettled William profoundly, something that fractured his rhythm and drained the natural ease from his smile. Friends who had known him for decades described a shift in his tone during conversations. Where once he spoke eagerly about projects and family, his words now carried caution. Sentences were shorter, humour more restrained in public. Though he still embodied leadership privately, he wrestled with a complex, deeply personal situation that left him conflicted. The evening before his sudden flight, he was seen driving alone through Windsor grounds, headlights cutting through the misty air. There were no escorts, no flashing motorcycles, just a solitary vehicle gliding silently through the darkness. Witnesses described him as motionless behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly, lost in thought. Later that night, staff members noted that he stayed awake long past midnight. Pacing his study in silence, the following morning he appeared before photographers at a small environmental event, smiling as always, tie impeccably straight, posture flawless. Yet beneath the tailored suit, his heart carried a heaviness no camera could capture. Every gesture measured, every word chosen with deliberate care, as though shielding himself from the weight of an unseen truth. Photographs from that day, later re-examined by the media, would become haunting symbols of a man balancing duty and distress behind the grandeur and precision of royal life. Prince William faced a storm words could not express. The charm that once came naturally now served as armour. His smile remained, but no longer reached his eyes. Every public appearance became an act of quiet endurance. The future king performed his role flawlessly, yet each step, each handshake, each nod carried the silent echo of a heart breaking beneath the weight of what he knew. The devastating discovery, the truth, when it finally came to light, was not a sudden explosion, but a slow unravelling that began behind closed doors. It was a whisper that grew louder with every passing hour. A confidential file, a private report, and a series of messages had reached Prince William's desk just days before his unexpected departure. The contents of those documents would shake even the strongest of hearts. They spoke of betrayal, loss, and a revelation so profound that it threatened to redefine everything Prince William thought he understood about loyalty, family, and the unspoken bonds that held his world together. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Trusted aides who had served the prince for years described the silence that followed as heavy, unsettling, almost suffocating in its intensity. The usual rhythm of the household stopped completely. Meetings were cancelled without explanation, phones went unanswered, and those who worked closest to him noticed a troubling pattern. William began spending hours locked away in his private study, the door firmly closed behind him. He was seen reading through stacks of papers, each page seemingly darker than the last. When he finally emerged, his steps were deliberate but slow, and his face was pale, as though the weight of what he had just learned had physically drained him of colour. Something fundamental within him had changed. Sources close to the royal household later hinted that the information had arrived unexpectedly, through channels no one within the palace could have predicted. It was the kind of revelation no one had been prepared to confront. While the details were strictly confidential, the timing aligned eerily with a significant event that had been quietly removed from the public diary, hidden behind layers of royal protocol and discretion. It became clear to those around him that the prince was processing something too painful, too delicate to share with anyone else. The people surrounding him attempted to maintain their routines, yet each effort seemed hollow. Briefings, documents to sign, public appearances, all continued, but those who encountered him described a focus that was distant, mechanical even. He remained polite and composed, yet detached, as if a piece of him had withdrawn entirely from the world he had once commanded effortlessly. Every so often, his gaze would drift toward the window, lingering on the horizon as though searching for something far beyond his reach. The weight of his discovery had begun to isolate him from the world that relied on his calm authority at home. The strain was impossible to hide. Family dinners that once carried laughter were now subdued, muted, the joy that had once filled the halls replaced by an uneasy quiet. His children, unaware of the turmoil, played in the gardens while their father paced the corridors, lost deep in thought. The few friends who reached out to check on him found their calls unanswered. For a man raised in the public eye, this retreat into solitude spoke volumes. The news he had received had not only shaken his trust in those around him, but had reopened deep personal wounds that had never truly healed. By the time the decision to travel to Scotland was made, silence had become his only refuge. Scotland was not simply a destination, it was a place of memory, of healing, and of ancestral connection. It was the land where his grandmother had found peace, where his mother had once sought solace from the relentless chaos of royal life, and where he could confront his own thoughts without intrusion. For William, it represented the one place untouched by scandal or deceit, a landscape that still held truth among its ancient stones and open skies. The flight was arranged quietly, far from official channels, known only to a small, trusted circle, and even they were given minimal information. When the jet finally lifted from the runway, it carried more than the heir to the throne. It carried a man weighed down by revelation, the magnitude of which could not be erased by power or position. It demanded silence, space, and distance from the watchful eyes of a world that would not understand the enormity of what he had uncovered. As the plane descended through the Scottish mist, William's mind replayed every moment leading up to his decision. Every conversation, every warning he had previously dismissed, now echoed with piercing clarity. The truth had been there all along, waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. Now it stood before him in full clarity, impossible to ignore. The discovery had been devastating, not only for what it revealed, but for what it destroyed. The fragile trust that had sustained his private world. In the stillness of that journey, Prince William was no longer just the public figure shaped by tradition, protocol, and duty. He was a man confronting a revelation that stripped away every title, every expectation, and every carefully cultivated layer of composure. In that solitude, he faced a reality no crown could shield him from. the painful cost of truth. Whispers of Balmoral carried a calm that London could never offer. The vast highlands stretched endlessly under a silver sky, their timeless presence offering a rare sense of perspective. The scent of pine and rain lingered over the valleys when William's car finally wound its way along the narrow road leading to Balmoral Castle. It was well past midnight, the headlights cut through the mist, reflecting faintly against the towering iron gates of the royal estate. For generations, Balmoral had been a sanctuary, a fortress of silence for the royal family when the world became too loud. Now, it stood ready for another wounded soul, seeking shelter within its walls. Only a handful of staff were aware of his arrival. Security was tightened, cameras were disabled, and public access to the surrounding grounds quietly restricted. Though classified as a personal visit, everyone who worked within those ancient stone walls understood its gravity. This was no leisure trip. The prince had arrived not for relaxation, but for clarity. The following morning, the stillness of Balmoral was broken only by footsteps on gravel and the distant hum of wind sweeping across the trees. William spent hours walking paths once favoured by his grandmother, the solitude of the highlands granting him the rare chance to think freely, without the constant shadow of royal obligation. He had brought no press team, no entourage, only a single aide who understood the profound weight of silence in this secluded wing of the castle. A private meeting was quietly arranged. Trusted advisors arrived in unmarked vehicles, their presence noticed only by a few local journalists who sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding behind closed doors. Conversations stretched late into the afternoon. Documents were scrutinized, statements debated, and difficult truths confronted. Each discussion deepened the significance of what William had discovered back in London. The evidence before him was undeniable, capable of shaking not just his personal foundation, but the institution he was born to lead. Witnesses later described his demeanour as grave yet composed. He listened far more than he spoke, weighing each word with the care of a man who knew that a single misstep could reverberate for generations. In moments of pause, he would step to the window, gazing out toward the endless hills, seemingly seeking counsel from the landscape itself, the same wilderness that had comforted his ancestors. He withdrew to the small family chapel under the flickering glow of candlelight. There, he sat long after prayers had ended, alone. The staff noticed that his head remained bowed, expression unreadable, as though he were laying his burdens before something greater than himself. For the royal family, Balmoral had always symbolized tradition and retreat. For William, it had now become the stage of an inner reckoning. The walls that had once echoed with laughter during family holidays now bore witness to his quiet struggle. Every corridor reminded him of the lineage he represented. Every portrait seemed to watch silently, while the Scottish rain began falling again, soft and unending, washing over roofs, gardens, and stone paths where he wandered alone. Somewhere between the whispering winds and the weight of memory, he made a silent decision, a resolution that would guide his next steps upon returning to London. Reflection was ending. Action was demanded. Though his heart remained heavy, his resolve had begun to crystallize. The prince who arrived broken in spirit was slowly finding strength, echoes of his mother's legacy guiding him. The quiet of Balmoral carried more than rain and wind. It carried memory. Every stone, every corridor, every field seemed to whisper the name of Princess Diana, shaping his resolve, reminding him of lessons in courage, compassion, and truth. This was no mere retreat. It was a sanctuary entwined with the deepest parts of his past. The echoes of childhood blended with lessons of loss, and it was in these echoes that he began to find meaning in the pain that had driven him north. He walked the very trails his mother once loved, the open fields where she had brought him and Harry as boys, escaping the glare and pressure of royal life. Those days had been filled with laughter and innocence, now distant shadows that returned in memory. As he gazed across the misty hills, he could almost hear her voice, gentle and protective, urging him to remain steadfast. In that moment, he remembered the woman who had taught him that love could endure even in the coldest palace halls. William had spent much of his adult life balancing two worlds, one defined by duty, the other modelled by his mother, a life grounded in empathy, compassion, and unflinching honesty. The discovery that had shattered his peace now tested that balance, demanding both strength and wisdom, qualities Diana had nurtured in him from the very start. As he wrestled with the information that had reached him, he reflected on how she had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and isolation, yet never allowed bitterness to rule her spirit. Inside Balmoral's library, William spent long hours reading through personal notes and letters preserved from his grandmother's collection. Among them, a handwritten letter from his mother, written in the late 90s, caught his attention. Its words were simple, yet piercing. She had written of her hope that her sons would stand for honesty when the world chose silence. Those lines struck deeply, a reminder that legacy is preserved not by perfection, but by courage. The weight of that legacy pressed heavily upon him. His mother's experiences had shown him the consequences of burying truth for appearance's sake. The discovery he had made carried the same warning, something that could not be ignored, something that threatened to repeat mistakes that had haunted his family for decades. He realized that to stay silent would be to betray the principles his mother had died defending. In the privacy of the castle's drawing room, William began to write. He filled page after page with thoughts, reflections, and plans, lines that spoke not only of pain, but of determination, resolve, and a growing sense of responsibility. The act of writing connected him to her spirit, reminding him that his journey was part of a larger story spanning generations. The ink became his confession, his prayer, and his promise. By nightfall, he returned to the small chapel. The air was cool, candles burned low, and the quiet enveloped him. He sat in silence, hands folded, head bowed, as the stained glass window glowed faintly, depicting a mother and child surrounded by angels. The symbolism was not lost on him. This was where he understood that grief, when faced with courage, could become guidance, and that the lessons of loss were inseparable from leadership. His mother's life had been marked by heartbreak, yet her legacy was one of love, resilience, and unwavering principle. Now it was his turn to carry that legacy forward. As dawn broke over the highlands, the first light of day illuminated the mist that clung to the hills. William stood by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, recognizing that the journey that had begun in secrecy was turning into a confrontation not just with discovery, but with destiny. His mother's spirit seemed to move with the wind outside, a silent reminder that truth, no matter how painful, must always be faced. Prince William was no longer running from what he had learned. He was standing within it, allowing the lessons of the past to prepare him for what lay ahead. The shadow of his mother's legacy, which had once brought sorrow, now offered strength. The boy who had once walked beside her in these fields was now a man, walking into the storm she had warned him would come. A family divided. When Prince William returned to London, the stillness of Balmoral quickly faded. Inside the palace, whispers moved faster than footsteps. Every conversation seemed to stop when he entered a room. The discovery that had driven him to Scotland was no longer merely a private burden. It had become the unspoken tension dividing those closest to him. Royal aides, advisors, and family members found themselves on uncertain ground. Some believed transparency was the only way to protect the monarchy's integrity. Others urged silence, insisting certain truths remain locked behind palace doors. For centuries, discretion had been the monarchy's armour, but William no longer saw silence as strength. He had witnessed what secrecy had done to his mother and carried that memory as a warning. Meetings once filled with polite efficiency now pulsed with unease. Late-night discussions unfolded in guarded tones, words chosen with precision. The walls of Kensington Palace seemed to listen. William spoke little, but his silence carried weight. The rift within the family deepened. Communication between key members grew cold, marked by pauses and polite distance. Trust, once solid, had fractured under hidden truths, even among those sworn to loyalty. Uncertainty spread like a quiet storm. William's sense of isolation returned, sharper now that he was surrounded by formality rather than the peaceful silence of the Highlands. Father and son met several times. The king, seasoned in royal endurance, counselled caution. He spoke of legacy, unity, and the importance of preserving the monarchy's dignity. William listened respectfully, his expression calm, but his mind remained fixed on conviction rather than comfort. Leadership meant confronting what others avoided, not burying truths that had already surfaced. Catherine remained his constant presence, becoming his sounding board and calm. Together, they faced the growing storm with quiet strength, aware the world outside was already speculating. The House of Windsor stood under pressure once again, divided not by scandal alone, but by a painful truth and the courage it demanded. Scotland's silent witnesses in the mist had kept their secrets. The small villages surrounding Balmoral had long grown used to royal visits, but this one carried a different tone. There were no photographers at the gates, no cheerful greetings from locals. The arrival of Prince William came and went without ceremony, wrapped in quiet tension that seemed to settle over the land. Residents of Bear and Crate later spoke of subtle changes. Black vehicles moved through narrow roads at odd hours. Police patrols increased, and local deliveries were redirected. Everyone sensed something significant was unfolding behind the castle walls, yet no one dared ask questions. Silence was a form of loyalty. One morning, before sunrise, a fisherman along the river noticed a solitary figure walking the bank. The man wore a dark coat and cap, his steps slow, posture heavy. It was unmistakably the prince. He paused often, gazing at the still water as the fog drifted past. He looked not like a royal, but like any man carrying grief. The chapel on the estate became his refuge. Its caretaker later recalled faint footsteps at night, the creak of a door, and candlelight glowing softly. William would remain there for hours, motionless, head bowed in prayer or thought. The solitude of the Highlands seemed to absorb his sorrow. Locals respected the silence, turning away when his convoy passed. For centuries, Scotland had been a royal sanctuary, where the burdens of crown and title could fade into mist. It became that again, his shelter in the storm. By the end of his stay, those who glimpsed him noticed change. His face remained pale, eyes tired, but steps were firmer. The land had listened. The silence had steadied him. Scotland, ancient and loyal, had borne witness to his pain, helping him find the strength to return to the world beyond the hills, the return and the questions. When Prince William's jet touched down in London, the air felt heavier than when he had left. The quiet refuge of the Highlands was behind him, and ahead lay relentless scrutiny. The moment his car rolled through Kensington Palace gates, silence was replaced by questions, from aides, advisors, and a press corps circling for answers. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Staff avoided eye contact. They had read headlines, seen speculation, and understood that something significant had occurred. William moved with quiet resolve, acknowledging greetings with a nod, but offering no explanations. The time for reflection was over. Decisions would soon be made publicly. His first engagement after returning was a community event in London. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted, yet his demeanour remained calm, measured, almost unreadable. He smiled for photographs, but the warmth that usually defined his presence seemed muted. Observers noted weariness in his eyes, the kind no rest could erase. Palace sources released a short statement calling his trip a period of private reflection. It was brief, deliberately vague, and did little to calm the storm. The media seized every word, analysing tone and timing. Royal experts debated its deeper meaning. Some believed he went north to process family issues. Others claimed the trip was tied to security or personal loss. The truth remained behind closed doors, guarded as tightly as the man himself. Back home, his children's laughter filled the gardens. Catherine kept their home calm, shielding the family from noise beyond the walls. Yet even she knew the weight he carried. The days ahead would demand composure, diplomacy, and discernment. As evening settled, William stood by his study window, looking toward the fading skyline. Questions outside grew louder, but inside, he had made peace with one certainty. The truth, whatever its cost, would soon have to come to light. The days that followed unfolded slowly, marked by reflection and quiet strength. With each sunrise, Prince William carried renewed purpose, yet a gravity lingered in his every movement. He had confronted the truth in Scotland and now bore its weight with calm endurance. Discussions continued, advisors debated strategies. William listened, but the decision was forming. He knew the monarchy's survival depended on trust. Once broken, trust could only be rebuilt through honesty. Lessons of his mother's life and Balmoral's stillness guided him. truth must never be hidden for convenience. In private moments, he thought of generations who carried the crown, the triumphs, sacrifices, and secrets that shaped their reigns. He realized his path would be different. The world was changing. The monarchy's future demanded transparency over tradition alone. The discovery that had once shattered him now gave clarity. It was no longer just a wound, it had become a turning point. One morning, he met with his father. The conversation was quiet, but profound. Respect filled the room. Though unspoken tension lingered, both men understood that change, though painful, was inevitable. For the monarchy to endure, it had to adapt. William's resolve was clear, and his father recognized the same strength. When he stepped before the public again, the energy was different. His presence was steadier, grounded in purpose. Cameras captured not a prince burdened by secrets, but a man prepared to lead with integrity. The storm that began with a devastating discovery revealed something greater, a leader willing to bear the weight of truth. Prince William's secret journey to Scotland was more than an escape. It was a reckoning. The heir who once stood in the shadow of tradition returned with clarity. The discovery that had shaken him shaped him, forging a deeper understanding of duty, integrity, and legacy. Scotland became his mirror, reflecting both the burden and beauty of truth. As the world continues to speculate, one thing remains certain: the future king has been changed by what he faced in silence. Behind polished smiles and public duties lies a story of courage, a man learning that real power is not in the crown, but in the strength to face the truth alone and still stand ready to lead when the world calls his name. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.